is actually more complete. And the first chapter, the original first chapter, is actually very important because it explains how the Jews ended up in exile to begin with. And it tells a lot about what they were actually doing in the temple. Because at this time, they were still using the original temple that Solomon built. And what happened, the first chapter that was removed, but you can find it, it's actually in the Greek version is Esdras, Esdras, but it's the same as Esdras. If you read the entire book, you'll realize once you get to chapter 2 what you're reading. And it was during the time of King Josiah in Jerusalem. And one year, him and his top generals, they decided to hold the grandest Passover since the time of the ancient prophets in their recorded history. It was a big deal. Thousands of cattle, thousands of calves, thousands of this and that, of goats, the fruit and vegetables of the field. And they prepared it all in their kosher way. And it was sent to the temple day and night, where it was burned on the altar of perpetual fire, an offering to God. And then they put it in large kettles, and day and night the Levite priests took it all through the city, and anybody who hungered held out their bowl to eat all through the Passover. They didn't just burn it up, they cooked it. And you got to understand that this was a long time ago. Talking Baghdad batteries are 4,000 to 5,000 years old, they think. So that had to have been the actual time period of when that happened. And the dates changed because so many people for centuries have edited. It's been edited so much. But I believe those batteries had a lot to do with the perpetual fire. Because if they could make a simple battery, all they'd have to do was just ground them out on a hot plate, a plate of bronze, and it would get hot enough to cook. There's a lot of projects on YouTube where you can actually solder hot enough to melt metal with a AA battery. I had a AA battery soldering iron. And if you've got thousands of 1 to 2 volt batteries, I'm pretty sure that you could just keep swapping them out if you had some kind of ritualistic method to get them in there, ground them out, get it hot, swap them out, change the vinegar, give them a shake. I can see that as very plausible. That they were using a technology, because they cooked so much meat and vegetables. And they burned it in a burnt offering to God, but then they chopped it up and put it in the kettles and made a hearty stew and fed the people day and night. Well, I can see a lot of reasons why they took that out. Nobody wants everybody to put into the church and just give it away and feed the whole city. The Romans couldn't have that for all their temples, for one thing, during the Passover. No way. They were the ones that added tithing to the Bible. Tithing doesn't exist in the Greek version. King James left it in because he liked the idea of getting an extra 10% tax from churchgoers. But anyways, how they got into exile. And during this time, shortly after, towards the end of the Passover, he got word from his scouts that one of the pharaohs was coming up out of Egypt. And he thought, oh, we just had this grand Passover. He took the armies of Jerusalem to the field and met the Pharaoh. And as they did in those days, they exchanged letters, communications, messengers. In a nutshell, Pharaoh said, hey, stay out of this, Israel, because he was going against Babylon. It was a different name in that time, but it's the same place, Baghdad. And to stay out of it because God was with the Pharaoh. And Josiah basically laughed at him because he just had such a great Passover. And everybody knew God had already freed the Israelis from the Pharaoh, so he more or less basically laughed at him and they engaged in war. What happened was Josias got his butt kicked. The army was routed. He managed to make it back to Jerusalem on his second chariot, which means his first one was destroyed, and he needed a spare. And he died shortly after getting back to Jerusalem. He only lived a day or two once he returned to the city. And the Pharaoh chased him all the way. And one of the ways why the Pharaoh kicked his butt so bad is because of Nebuchadnezzar. He kind of sent out enough troops to harass the Israelis from the side. And that's a big part of how they got routed. And that Pharaoh was the first one to sack the city. But he did it in the traditional way. The city-state phase, what they would actually do is if they kicked your butt, you would have to pay like a tax for so many years. They would make the documents and clay tablets. And that would help keep the city back because they would have to pay that. And it would be harder to rebuild the army and such. That's just the way they used to do things until the Romans changed it. But anyways, Josias was dead, so the Pharaoh appointed a governor. And lo and behold, that governor was evil. Pharaoh got angry. He came back to Jerusalem. He sacked the city again, demanded a new tribute, and he disposed of the first governor, placed a second governor. And the second governor was more evil than the first. And by this time, Nebuchadnezzar found out about it. And he beat back to Pharaoh, and Nebuchadnezzar came to Israel, and he appointed the third governor. And the third governor turned out to be more evil than the other two together. So Nebuchadnezzar, in anger, bound him in bronze chains and bound all of Israel. He put them all in bondage. He sacked the entire city and destroyed it. He tore down the temple, and he ordered the Levite priest to deconstruct their holy relics and to reconstruct them in Nebuchadnezzar's temple and to do their rituals for Nebuchadnezzar, which they did for 70 years until Cyrus freed them. And then that's chapter 2 of Esdras, going on from that. But the first chapter, it's very, very, very important because it shows a lot the folly of thinking you have God's favor. People have watched these videos. I've gotten some criticism about me invoking. We all get judged in the afterlife. I got to face God about that, folks. I wasn't bothering nobody that watches these videos except for the ones that edit them and stuff, and people say, oh, that's hogwash, but I don't believe it, because I remember Edward Snowden making the whole entire world aware that the U.S. spies on pretty much every phone, every video, every Facebook, you name it. They got AI that goes through all that stuff and looks at it. In the end, I think Donald Trump really does want to make America great again, and he thought backing Israel just when global warming was kicking off and with the pole flipping, all those are ancient signs. Those are signs that are in the book of Enoch, because Noah noticed that the world was tilting, and he consulted his great-grandfather Enoch before the great flood, before the final actual flood, because he noticed the earth was tilting. And that's kind of what it is when the pole flips. You don't notice it yet, but I'm highly confident that just don't flip around, that it kind of drags the whole earth with it. It's changing the magnetics of the earth's magnetic field, but they're distracting everybody with this Hollywood act, and all the racial inequality, all that does have to go. But at the same time, we can't just have no police. We have to have law and order. There needs to be some kind of middle ground, because regardless of Donald Trump, the United States of America is not going to allow itself to fall into utter chaos. If we fall into utter chaos, then another mighty, powerful, and almost appear to us nation could get that as a sign of weakness. And there's another nation out there that's redrawing lines on the map and just taking large portions and brushing smaller and weaker countries out of the way. And maybe America's redemption is doing something about that, folks. Maybe Donald Trump's redemption is slapping the fuck out of the people that deliberately planned the biological attack with this coronavirus. That being said, I don't think the coronavirus is entirely the issue with people's health. Because there's a lot of news out there, all you really need to kill it is a hydrogen peroxide, an extra concentrated version of it. And they know there's ways to spray like nanoparticle water mist and hit it with UV, and it instantly changes to hydrogen peroxide and kills everything that it's in contact with. It kills all kinds of bacteria and viruses. And they've known that for a few years now. And I've looked into the Israeli booths that they're testing for their soccer stadiums and stuff. And they said their patented solution works on a hydrolysis process with electricity and salt water. That's a hydrogen generator. I blew one up in the science lab by accident. Luckily, I didn't even get scratched by it. Miracle I didn't get killed by it. That's God. I don't consider that luck at all. It kept me alive for a reason. People might get offended because they don't like some of what I have to say, because this is a little bit of a diary, but I'm leaving this behind for people that love me or watching these too. I got a wife and fiance that's going to watch this until there's no more available internet or electricity to do so. There's kids that are going to watch some of these. Because even though I don't give a whole lot of clues, and even though it's not all kid appropriate, there's stuff in here people need to know. I mean, it's only your soul. And if you want to believe what the Romans said, that all you need is to get washed once. And then you can just sin all you want. And Jesus covered all the sins. I don't think that's what God intended. I don't think God intended belief in Jesus to be a blanket wash of continuing to live a sinful life. And the sad truth is there are so many people that just don't even believe at all. So many versions of it, it's like going to a buffet. Do you want to be a Pentecost or do you want to be a Baptist? Do you want to go to the church that makes you feel good? Can't argue with that. But are you sure that's enough? Especially since so much has been removed from the Holy Book. The reason why the Ethiopians got more about it than everybody else, and the reason why they had it before white men even discovered Ethiopia in the 1700s, is because King Solomon married their queen and had black children. And the Jews rejected it and removed that book from the canon. And it was not known other than what the copy that was found in Ethiopia. And pretty much the only other version of that is like in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it's been widely known. It's been widely published. It's a doomsday prophecy. And it's very accurate. Enoch says he handed the book to his son Methuselah. Everybody who's read the Bible knows who Methuselah is, and told him to preserve it. So even back at the time of Methuselah, Enoch described the events around the time of Moses. But they reject it because it says the world was black and the children of the angels are destined to destroy each other because there's two groups. And the one group, by and large, I'm not saying each and every single individual, but as a nation, they pretty much reject the concept of God and Jesus. I've had two fathers, biological and adopted, several uncles that served in the Vietnam War. And I believe them when they say, and you try to talk about Christianity to the Vietnamese, and they laugh at you and saying it's fairy tales. And that's pretty much the sentiment in most Buddhist nations. And they're allowed to believe what they want. I believe the Christian Judean side of it, because there's got to be a good guy and a bad guy. Yin, yang. And we're coming up towards it, folks. That pole's a flipping for a reason. They can't figure out how that fast radio burst repeats in a 157-day cycle. Are you kidding me? It's a lunar calendar, 364 days a year. 157 times 2 is 364. It's a message. Yeah, it's probably coming from a magnetar. You know how? Because the black holes in the center of galaxies are magnetic, and they're so huge and contain such densities and energies that it boggles the mind. They're most likely sentient in a way that we can't even begin to imagine. Maybe all these fast radio bursts that all of a sudden out of nowhere are just like lighting up every radio telescope on the planet is a message that God is real. But they don't seem to be getting it.